This project is important because buildings account for about 40% of the energy use in this country. So the Green Rehab Experiment is testing two different buildings. They're identical buildings to try to push the envelope and make one of them a net zero energy building. The experiment is, one is a control building where we're rehabbing as you would just do, as a university would do a standard rehab. And the experimental building is the building where we're trying to push the envelope and we're trying to get to net zero energy. The experimental building is about 17% more efficient. It's using 17% less energy than the control building. So the buildings were essentially taken down to the bare brick inside and built out from scratch. If you go visit these two buildings, you'll see that the windows from the outside look identical in the control and the experiment. The interesting thing is that in the control building, they're double hung windows, where one window slides up, they can both slide up and down. A pretty traditional window that most of us have. The experimental building, the windows look exactly the same, but they're casement windows. They open in and out like this. The big benefit of casement is there's less points for air infiltration. So they tend to be significantly more efficient. But if you stand out on the street and you see these two sets of windows, you wouldn't know the difference. If you walk into this space, you'll experience a space that feels like a really nice apartment, but nothing that's particularly unique about it. So essentially, without having a very special super green environment where people have to, they can only turn on the water for 2 seconds when they brush their teeth, or they can only take 3-minute showers, it's a standard apartment. So the key components of the experiment are the design components of building out this efficient envelope, putting in more efficient systems. The experimental building has a more efficient air conditioning system, and it's got something called a heat recovery ventilator. So when you build a really efficient building, a very tight building envelope, you actually need to bring in fresh air into the space because the air can get stuffy because it is so tight. And what the heat recovery ventilator does is it allows you to bring in outside air, but it exchanges the heat. So imagine in the middle of the winter time, right? You've got people over at your apartment, you're having a good time together, and it starts to get stuffy. What that heat recovery ventilator does is it brings in the outside air, but it's exchanging the heat that is in the air inside, and it's essentially transferring the heat to the fresh, cold air coming in to preheat it. You're not just bringing in cold air from the outside that will then need to be heated up by the normal heating system. You're exchanging the heat as you're bringing in that fresh air, and it significantly reduces how much you'll then have to heat it up to make it comfortable. So the key things that a resident can do in his or her home some of our biggest uses are our heating and cooling. So really paying attention to how much heating and cooling we're using. In the wintertime, keeping your thermostat lower. In the summertime, keeping it higher. If you've got a ceiling fan, using that ceiling fan so that instead of having your AC at 73, you can put it at 78 and still be comfortable. So if you want to identify two things to reduce your usage, I would say just get a clothing drying rack and passively dry your clothes. It will shockingly reduce your energy use, and pay very close attention to your lights, your lighting use. So first, compact fluorescents and now LEDs, the cost is coming down and down and down. The quality of light is great. LEDs in particular, they're dimmable. They've got really beautiful spectrum of light that they put out. It's time to swap out your light bulbs. If we could get to a point where every single building could be a self-sustaining entity, you could go from having a whole set of users that instead of being a net sink, a net consumer of energy, could actually be either net zero or they could be a producer.